There may be no single economic concept that is more poorly understood by the lay public and most politicians, of both varieties, than the federal government's budget. I suspect that some of this is willful ignorance, with an ulterior motive, but the vast majority is simply and solely because it has not been explained to them. They assume that it's like their personal or business budget. It is not. It's fundamentally different, and the lessons drawn from one cannot necessarily be applied to the other. I'll try to make this as short as possible, but damn it, it's sort of complicated. You can't truly understand it, however, without this background, and you need to understand it. There is no government and no foreign sector. There is only one potential employer in this world, and he has the factories that makes all the goods and services everyone else demands. The entrepreneur's factories can produce sufficient output for all workers, but by employing only 14 of them. For simplicity, I'll ignore the fact that the entrepreneur needs to consume too. The entrepreneur is not a charity. He has a family to feed, as well. So he won't hire all the workers just to be nice. He only needs 14 to make the goods and services for everyone, and therefore that's all he'll hire. But wait, that's not quite right, is it? Because if some don't have jobs, recall there's only one employer, then there's no point in making goods they can't afford to purchase. Hence, the entrepreneur doesn't even hire 14 people. For the sake of argument, let's say that rolling back production to 12 people creates an equilibrium in which the entrepreneur can hire 12 and produce output for the 12 workers. Now we have the following: 12 working, 5 unemployed, and the entrepreneur earning profits associated with 12 workers. In the smallest nutshell possible, that's how the macroeconomy works. It is absolutely vital to understand this in thinking about the federal government budgets. Although not state and local budgets, they do operate like your personal budget. Put in the front of your mind a fundamental fact about the laid-out situation. We have the physical capacity to produce output for everyone, but because we can do so without their help, they have to go without. Not only is this a really crappy deal for the unemployed, but the employed are probably somehow supporting them, officially or unofficially, and the entrepreneur would love to be earning extra profits associated with sales to the unemployed. Everyone is made worse off by this situation. The underlying problem is that as productivity increases, it becomes more and more difficult for the profit motive alone to generate full employment in a macroeconomy. Let's create a government sector and make a soldier, police officer, and teacher. They are each paid a salary sufficient to buy what the entrepreneur is selling, and everyone is happy. The workers don't have to support 5 unemployed people. The entrepreneur hires 2 additional workers to expand production and earns profits associated with the 17 customers instead of 12. The newly employed can now share in the output that could already be produced for them. In addition, not only did the original 12 workers have to give up absolutely nothing in terms of what they had been buying from the entrepreneur, but now they have protection from domestic international aggression and a place to send their kids to school. Everyone is better off. But note how incredibly easy this is to solve in a way that raises everyone's welfare. 14 working, 3 government employees, 1 entrepreneur earning profits associated with sales to 17 workers. This is the essential role of the federal government in a mature capitalist economy. Without the government supplementing demand, the system breaks down, and despite our ability to produce goods and services for everyone, we don't. There will also be cyclical highs and lows. We are experiencing the latter at the moment in case you hadn't noticed. But in general, we face the problems outlined before, and this is something the private sector cannot solve on its own. Whence comes the money government uses to pay the 3 government workers? There are 3 options. They could tax the original workers, but that means they won't be able to buy the same volume of the entrepreneur's products as they were before. There is no logical reason that those 12 should have to settle for less, so that's not a good idea. All we would be doing is changing who had the income generated from them in the macroeconomy, i.e., taking it from workers and giving it to the others. We need more income, not a redistribution. Again, there is 0 reason the original workers need to give up anything. Option 2. Borrowing. The government could borrow the money from the original workers and use that to pay government employees. This assumes the original workers are earning enough money to both buy from the entrepreneur and save money, but if so, this might be a useful thing to do. It would probably give the original workers a relatively low rate of return, but a safe investment. And in fact, when they first introduced the U.S. T-bills during World War I, they were too popular. However, our goal is not to give the original workers an attractive means of saving, but to create jobs. In addition, There is absolutely no reason to expect the volume the government could borrow would equal what they need to pay the salaries of the unemployed workers. It depends entirely on how much savings currently exist. We don't want people to become fixated on the idea that if government borrows, this means they will have to pay it all back. Of course, each individual debt must be honored, but A, it never needs to be reduced to zero, and B, so long as the debt is owed in dollars, as it is, we can never go bankrupt. In fact, one of my friends actually has a page where he promised $100 million to the person who can prove that the U.S. can go bankrupt. That's a safe bet for him. It can't happen. Option 3, printing money. But frankly, the most obvious and straightforward thing to do is this: print money and pay their salaries. People will typically react to this with shock, crying out, "But that will cause inflation!" But first off, no it doesn't. Second, there are posts about inflation linked below. The short story on inflation is this: printing more money can be inflationary if no more goods and services are produced. But remember that the whole point of raising the money supply here is to raise the volume of goods and services produced. We pay the government workers enough to make the production of goods from the entrepreneur's factory profitable to him. Hence, the level of output rises just as much as the volume of the money supply, and there is no inflation. Contrast that with the situation in a small developing nation. Perhaps their productive capacity is such that they simply can't produce enough for all their workers, only some. In that case, creating those government jobs causes inflation, more money but no more goods than before. That is not the case in the U.S., however. Technically, we cannot choose to simply print money to fund government spending in the U.S., but de facto we can use option 2. When the Federal Reserve buys the debt, they already are the number one single owner of federal government debt, since they will pay with brand new dollar bills. The new spending is created with new cash. This creates new demand without draining it from elsewhere in the macroeconomy, or creating the illusion of a burden on future generations. In conclusion, my main points are these. 1. It is critical that the government generate demand in the macroeconomy if we are to reach full employment, and it doesn't cost anyone anything for them to do so, since we are starting at less than full capacity. If we don't do this, then we are, I don't know how else to say this, royally screwed. This is a key problem. Businesses are incapable of controlling effective demand. Thus, we need the visible hand of government to stimulate demand, but not take over what is already being demanded. 2. In a technical sense, we don't need to finance any of this spending. In other words, it is not necessary for us to find someone with extra cash to loan to us. We can simply print it, or have the Fed buy the treasuries. In fact, this makes the most sense since our goal is to expand demand, not rearrange it. 3. Since the debt is issued in our own currency, Greek debt was not incidentally, we cannot possibly go bankrupt. That concept does not make sense in this context. Unfortunately, we have the gut feeling that debt is bad and surplus is good, but that's because we are transferring the logic from our own personal lives to the federal government. It simply doesn't apply. It is, as Paul Samuelson once said, a myth that is useful only insofar as it imposes a cost on government officials who might have little too much fun spending money. Furthermore, if we not only do not spend more money right now, but begin to cut back, then we are doomed to a Japan-like decade-plus-long period of poor economic performance. To be honest, I think that's where we're headed. Not only do the Republicans, now in greater power than before, believe that it is what we need to do, but Obama only disagrees with them in degree, not in principle. Remember how the Great Depression ended? The massive government spending from World War II. Only under such circumstances we were able to make people forget about what they think of as fiscal responsibility and focus on, inadvertently of course, economic responsibility. I have the feeling the Japanese aren't going to save us this time.